Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our services, if we can please kindly turn off all cell phones or electronic devices, or please place them on silent. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. Not that any of you would really choose to be anywhere else. God greeted this day with you, along with the strength to be with this family that today enters into the state of mourning for someone who was so very special to so very many, and I know also to all of you. There's always a sense I have that when mourners wear the black ribbon and tear it, that there's a sense that they're doing it because they are the closest circle of family to the one who has passed from our world, but they're also doing it to represent everybody else who really feels a sense of loss, a sense of sadness, and also of spiritual level pain, knowing that Morton Kanovsky's voice and presence won't be experienced by any of us who had the chance to experience his presence for however short a time, or for some of you for many, many blessed years. I know you feel that pain and sadness today, and I know that that pain and sadness is being translated into support and a lot of active love for this family that feels it most of all. Recently, and if I'm being honest, this morning, learned a phrase from the Talmud, which basically amounts to the idea that good things happen in the world because good people choose to do good things in the world. And they're teaching something quite profound about that, because sometimes we think our lives are mostly the product of happenstance and circumstance and luck, things that we can't really control. But the rabbis were reminding us that this world is made a better place because good people choose to do good things. And as soon as I saw that, way in the depths of parts of the Talmud most people don't ever come across or spend a lot of time learning, I thought of Mort. I thought of the way that you described him, and I thought of the way that he's being talked about around Bethel, even in these days following his loss. And I thought, what a wonderful example. What a wonderful example of someone who made this world a better place because of the good things that this good person chose to do. It's part of the legacy that you're going to hear about today from multiple generations of this loving family who we stand with and will continue to be with over these days, weeks, and months ahead as you adjust to life without Mort's physical presence, but of course, always with the legacy that he leaves and that we will continue to learn from through and via your continued good actions in this world as well. So on behalf of Chazan Pomerantz-Boro and Rabbi Hollander, who are here, and also on behalf of Rabbi Krupnik, who is sad that his travel schedule simply did not allow him to get back in time for this service, your Bethel family and community and your gathered family and friends stand with you today and always will. Chazan will chant Psalm 23.
מזמור לדוד. Adonai roi lo echzar min adeshe yarbitzeni al mei menuchot yanaleni nafshi yeshover yanecheni v'magale tzedek leman shemo gam ki helech begetz al mavet lo irara ki ata imati shivtecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni taroch lefanai shulchan neged zorerai dishanta vashemen roshi kosi revaya ach tov chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai v'shavti bevet Adonai leorech yamim.
The 23rd Psalm, a psalm for David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. It's during this time of the holiday of Sukkot that we refer to this time as Zman Simchatenu, the time of our joy. And this should be a week of a simcha, of joy, and it will be. And yet, as we're reminded during this season from the book of Kohelet, from the scroll, that a season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for planting and a time for reaping, a time for keeping and a time for discarding, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for embracing and a time for refraining, a time for slaying and a time for healing, a time for laughing and a time for weeping, a time for dancing and a time for wailing, a time for birthing and a time for dying, a time for speaking and a time for silence, a time for seeking and a time for losing. As we feel that sense during Sukkot of the changing of the seasons, as we express our gratitude for all that we've had before the beginning of winter, in many ways today, we express our gratitude for the life that we have shared with Mort. And to begin that sharing of gratitude and of stories, we call upon Alan to share on behalf, beginning to share of those memories.
Good morning, friends and family. Thank you to our clergy for your words of healing and inspiration, and thank you for being here today with the Kanovsky family, remembering our beloved Father Mort. We have been greatly touched by your outpouring of support. I know that everyone has a story to share about Mort. That's why you are here today. And thank you. I will begin my remarks from Sharon, his daughter. He was my pops, my daddy-o, and the best dad in the world. He can make me laugh just at the thought that he might tickle me. As a little girl, I thought he was a giant standing 6 feet tall. He was always skinny, despite his stash of chazarai in the trunk of his car, desk, or cupboard, as his grandchildren are fully aware of. He had a big smile, a twinkle in his eyes for people he loved, gave the best hugs, and called me Dolly. My dad lost his father very young, so things weren't easy for him. His sister Sora and his mom, but they made do and surrounded himself with cousins and more cousins and friends that stuck for a lifetime. Here you are today. Dad met my mom at 16, introduced by a mutual friend, someone who is still friend over 70 years later. They eventually married when Dad was in the Army. He was an accountant, learned his trade while stationed in Anchorage, Alaska, far, far away. And through college that my mother pressed him to complete. He rose in the ranks of his company, Cybron Chemicals, and eventually became a division controller near Mount Holly, which is what brought us to Cherry Hill. He worked for one company for 35 years, practically unheard of today. He worked hard, always leaving the house by 6:30 in the morning, but was always home for family dinner, a time that we took turns at the dinner table, sharing our stories from the day. After dinner, he could be found at his desk, in the basement, or in the family room. It wasn't until his retirement dinner that I realized the global extent of his reach and how beloved he was by his colleagues. They especially loved my dad's promise of bagels when they hit their $1 million accounts receivable collection goal, memorialized on an apron because he was the grill master of the house. That is, until I arrived, Alan, on the scene, and I affectionately was referred to as the chef-in-law. Dad taught me about business, debits, and credits, and I followed in his footsteps to become an accountant. He was always pointing out interesting articles in the Wall Street Journal and made sure he got the best deal possible on his subscription. He maximized his credit card rewards and was my personal gas buddy. There was never a time when we were traveling down to Cherry Hill when we didn't receive a phone call from Mort stating, "This is the best gas price today." He loved my mom first and foremost. They were married for 64 years. The family grew with me and Steve, and then eventually Polly and Alan and the grandkids. Even when he was no longer working, he worked on the house, painting and wallpapering, creating patios, gardens, growing tomatoes and cucumbers. He loved, loved, loved the beach, whether it was the Jersey Shore or Sanibel Island. His idea about sunscreen was SPF 0. He body surfed with me in the ocean and swam in the pool. He often took long walks on the beach or rode his bike. He was the anointed mayor of Anvil Court, where he lived for 45 years, and lived next to the neighborhood swim club, serving as its treasurer for many years. He taught us that if something is important to you, you step up and do something. And that was my father-in-law. Not in a shouting, obnoxious way, but quietly and with purpose, which is what he did for years at Bethel. He took care of getting the crowns and breastplates cleaned every year and crawled on the floor with a feather duster to clean the seat pockets in the sanctuary before the high holy days. He could putter around the house and yard all day long and was happiest when he was working on a project, tending to the cars. Cars, very, very important. Or getting ready for a trip. He spent hours packing and repacking for trips, which took my parents all over the world. He helped me with home improvements in the various places that I lived. I am still using the nails and drill he bought me at Home Depot. He said they would last me a lifetime, and he was right. We traveled, went to the beach, picked and ate blueberries. It didn't really matter what or where. I always loved the time we spent together. I loved when Dad and Mom came to see us in New York City, seeing shows or attending Bella's birthday parties in the park. The visits were never long enough. My dad showed me what true love means in a partner, and it took me a long time to find a person that loves me the way my dad loved my mom. Alan began attending services at Bethel with Dad, asked Dad for my hand in marriage after Kiddush, and thought of him as a second son. I was lucky to live not that far away for most of my life post-college, and I was fortunate to spend a lot of time with Dad recently since my parents moved to Lionsgate and our family's recent move to Cherry Hill. Rest in peace, Dad. I already miss you. Your loving Dolly. To look at Mort, my father-in-law, you understand him as having a big heart. He was well-liked by his community, as I can see out here in Old Orchard, especially on Anvil Court, where the Kanovsky family resided for over 40 years. He was given the title of mayor of Anvil Court for his steadfast commitment to overseeing his community. But Mort had a very big heart. He loved his community, and everyone who knew Mort loved him, as I can see today. Thank you. He had a way with people. Mort was an instant friend to anyone he met. And, as you all know, he loved his Bethel community of friends. Much like my own dad, who was my rock, Mort was very much like my own dad, of blessed memory. Kind, hardworking, loved by his family and friends. The Bethel community, my beloved in-laws, are devoted to observing Shabbat and keeping a kosher home, which took some time for the chef-in-law to get used to. I was forewarned by my father-in-law that I was to learn the difference between a dairy meal, a meat meal, and parve. After many instances of kind reinforcement by my father-in-law, I caught on with his steadfast support and guidance with, I'm sorry, Mom, plenty of mistakes mixed in. I don't know how many holes I dug up in the yard to bury my mistakes. Shh, don't tell Charlotte. On one occasion, my devoted father-in-law volunteered to be in charge of Bethel security during the high holy days. This meant that Dad became the sheriff of Bethel. I noticed that he took this very seriously. You really couldn't talk to him during this time. So we purchased a badge symbolizing his becoming the sheriff of Bethel for Dad to wear. I was really impressed with my father-in-law and his dedication to the safety and sanctity of the Bethel community. Our time together was, of course, family gatherings and sharing our time going to Bethel together for early morning service. On one special occasion, after services concluded, we attended Kiddush together. I noticed that Dad knew everyone, and they all called out to him. I was really impressed with his steadfast hospitality. I collected Dad during Kiddush, and I brought him back into the sanctuary for a talk. He seemed really perplexed. "You're taking me away from my friends in the Kiddush? Are you kidding?" We sat down together, and I discussed with Dad that I was asking him for permission to marry his daughter. As I was trembling and the sweat was just pouring down all over me, he looked at me and said that I am sure you and Sharon have discussed this matter. He said, "I want you to be best of friends, to love each other, and to work together and be happy." With that, he gave me his blessings and welcomed me into the family, pending notification of Mom, who was, after we arrived at home, was dragged into the kitchen for a discussion. "I have something very, very important to discuss with you." And then to Sharon, he spilled the beans, and he said, "I said yes." Family and friends, I cherish my time with Dad and the time that we spent together. And I can tell with this outpouring that you feel and have felt the same way about my father-in-law. We have been truly blessed. Today and every day moving forward will be a celebration of the time shared with my dear Father Morton. Thank you, Dad. We love you. We respect you. We will carry on and for Bella, this coming weekend will be a wonderful Simcha celebration to celebrate her bat mitzvah. So we go on to happy times and your memory. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Alexandra, and I'm Mort's oldest grandchild. I'm glad to get to share a few words today about how special he was. My grandfather was a wonderful person who was devout in his commitment to his faith and his family. He introduced me to many wonderful things in life, most notably dessert. My visits to Cherry Hill often featured a scheduled late-night snack of milk and cookies, or the long-standing family tradition of Kanovsky Pie Day, in which we methodically produced numerous apple pies to be frozen and deployed at family holidays throughout the rest of the year. I have my fond memories of my grandpa in his apron, greeting me with a whiskery kiss on the cheek before proceeding to expertly crimp a pie crust or peel an apple in one long spiral. It was always a pleasure to be in his presence, whether we were enjoying a long bike ride in Sanibel, bargaining over the safe return of the hidden Passover afikomen, or being regaled with the tale of the time he saw a moose in Alaska. I'll miss finding him taking a well-timed nap in his favorite chair and hearing half of the annual chorus of Happy Birthday over the phone. He will be remembered as a steadfast and loving husband, father, grandpa, and friend to many as we hold his memory close today and beyond. Thank you all for joining us.
Hi, I'm Steve, Charla and Mort's son. On behalf of my mom and Sharon, thank you for being here, either in person or virtually. I'll try to be brief, but it's hard to distill 88 years of a life well lived into only a few minutes. Also, apologies, Alan and Sharon and Alexandra and I didn't really edit our remarks, so there might be some redundancy along the way. I'd like to thank all of the doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals that cared for and treated my dad over the many years, the virtual hospital staff where he was towards the end, and most especially the staff at Samaritan Hospice in Mount Holly. The care and compassion he received at the very end was absolutely extraordinary. And I can't express how much that meant to my mom, my sister, and me. The cross-section of people here is quite amazing. How did you know my dad? You could be a family member, probably through Bethel, maybe the neighborhood, either Old Orchard in Cherry Hill, where Mom and Dad lived for over 45 years, or Lionsgate, their home over the last couple of years, or maybe through Sharon or me. Anyway, if you get a chance on your way out, say hello to somebody you don't know and share a memory of my dad. A little piece of him lives in all of us. Mom, Dad loved you unconditionally. You knew each other for more than 70 years and were married for more than 64. My lasting memory of you will be holding hands or sharing a kiss. Every year, you and your New Year's Eve party group managed to stay awake much later than I could. So every New Year's morning, I would look forward to a picture of the two of you embracing to welcome in the new year. His last words to you were, "You should be resting." Marriages like yours are magical and extraordinary. Sharon, Dad was so proud of us. Our academic and professional accomplishments, our travels, our concerts, our shows, the adults we've become. I know he was proudest of all of the lives and the families that we've built with Alan and with Polly. He and Mom were there every step of the way along all those journeys. Alexandra, Jeremy, Bella, Grandpa was so proud of you. Their house is full of pictures of you, and he loved hearing about all of your accomplishments. Schools, jobs, sports, friends. He loved you very much. I learned so much from my dad. I learned to love baseball. I learned to love the beach. I learned that he really should never be a barber. I do forgive him for cutting my hair so short once that I ended up with a sunburned scalp. I learned about driving. I learned how to drive a manual transmission, which he had been doing from much earlier than the legal driving age. I learned how to back into a parking spot because it always makes leaving that much easier. I learned why driving on a family trip should include rest stops only when absolutely necessary, and even then, reluctantly. I learned about living life with integrity and compassion, and about having a strong work ethic and sense of community. But most important, with him as a role model, I learned how to be a good person, a good husband, a good father, and a good friend. Thank you, Dad. I love you.
Thank you so much, Sharon and Alan and Alexandra and Steve. We appreciate, on behalf of everyone here, just what it takes to put together such coherent thoughts on a hard day and share them, with everyone who was inspired by each and every reflection and value and story. So I want to share a few words with your permission today as well. And to start by saying that I don't know if Mort was the first person that I met on my first Saturday morning at Bethel, but I could guarantee you that he was one of the first two or three, because he was always there nice and early, ready to offer me the gentle fist bump that had become his customary greeting. Of course, Chazan always got a hug and a kiss, but that's another matter. I also know that having arrived to Bethel only 2 years ago, I did not have the chance to know the Mort Kanovsky that many of you knew and appropriately appreciated, admired, and loved. He so clearly thought of Bethel as home, and under the careful and dedicated care of Charla and this beautiful group of friends, you made sure that he had that familiar environment really up until the final and recent medical decline that would result in us being here together today. Can't tell you how many people in recent days have said, but I just saw Mort at Shul. They did, because that is where he could be found with you so frequently, since Mort's work brought you to South Jersey and both of you to Bethel years ago. Mort is probably also the only person most of us will have ever met who hails from Kane, Pennsylvania. He and his sister Sarah indeed were very young when their father died as a result of injuries from a terrible workplace accident. His mother Rose was just 37, and they all pitched in to help keep the family business afloat. Mort became a delivery person for the clothes that were left in the care of the family dry cleaners. No doubt the focus on the work that needed to be done did not allow for as much academic exploration as he might have liked. He did go to Penn State for a little while and came back to Kane to work in a factory there. He got that bachelor's, going to school at night and on weekends. Another example of how Mort always did what needed to be done, a theme that has and will yet recur as he is remembered. He did what needed to be done for his country also, enlisting in the Army, being sent to finance school in Indianapolis, and then, as you heard, to Anchorage, Alaska, where he defended the country, as he said, with his M1 pencil. Charla and Mort came into each other's lives before his 17th birthday, and the story of how a Jewish boy from Kane met a Jewish girl from Rochester is one that involves so many chance occurrences that it might lead to a stronger faith that there is indeed a guiding hand in our lives, or at least at some times of our lives, especially the really important ones. Now, the truth is, you guys didn't become an item right away, but the wheels were in motion, and after a visit to Rochester by the boy from Kane, as you said, that was it. And then the boy from Kane and the girl from Rochester found out the boy's Army posting was going to be in Alaska. Mort went there to serve and sent you a fateful telegram to the effect of, let's get married. And you did on Lag BaOmer, 1960. And you packed up and went back together to the far reaches of Alaska. Out of the Army, you went back to Rochester, and Cybron sent Mort together with you here to consolidate some offices to be their controller, and that led to these beautiful Bethel connections, which turned into deep Bethel commitments. Especially after Mort retired, there was frequent Shabbos attendance, but also helping out with daily minyanim, serving as a gabbai, and in a memory that has already been shared and others are reflecting on, taking care of the silver from the Torahs, polishing it, having it polished before the holidays. But Charlotte, you were the only one who mentioned a connection to that story, that the night all that silver sat in the car in your garage was one of the most nerve-wracking evenings of the entire year. On retiring from his day job at 60, he stayed busy and active. He made dinner, took care of the lawn, did all the painting and wallpapering, cleaned the house fairly well. Baked pies and cakes, babysat grandchildren, went to the JCC every day, read the Wall Street Journal and looked after investments, went to the swim club in the summer, and you spent those blessed 2 months a year together on Sanibel Island in Florida. I know that Mort was very close and had a real soft spot for Rabbi Furman. That is a beautiful thing to have learned about in our conversation just the other day. And I know that Morton, you two, were and remain very close with Rabbi Krupnik. That is a blessing. Rabbis, at the end, as I said, of a long trip and hopes to be back to see you before the next round of holidays begins. But the reflection that he wrote about Mort from Rome is really very beautiful. And having let him know that I would be doing so, which I guess is only slightly different from asking his permission, I wanted to share the substantive part of it with you. Rabbi Krupnik's words. Mort Kanovsky was a gentleman among gentlemen. Not only was he blessed with a gentle soul, he was a gentleman in the old-fashioned way, the kind you saw in old movies, who just carried themselves with a certain grace and ease. He was thin and handsome in that Clark Gable way. He always knew the right thing to say to make people feel good and better for being in his presence. He had an even-keeled demeanor and an easy smile. I never in my life saw Mort angry or even frustrated. He took life in stride. He was dedicated to Charla, and you could see any time the two were together that Mort was infatuated with her. The two enjoyed la dolce vita, the sweet life, together. I spent countless hours with him from the time that I started as the assistant rabbi. Mort was a minyan regular and a proud Kohen who wore beautiful old tefillin that were aged to a lovely and soft brown patina. I could see him in them in my mind's eye right now. Parenthetically, I learned in our conversation that those tefillin were a gift to Mort from Rabbi Furman, and he treasured them especially deeply for that reason as well. Rabbi continues, Mort Kanovsky was a role model for me in a great many ways. While he enjoyed the professional life that he had led, he retired relatively early. He was thrifty and a good saver, had a decent pension, and was a savvy investor. When I met Mort in Charla, Mort was in what I would call the third trimester of his life. His professional work did not define him, his character did. He stayed physically active, and I would often ask him when I saw him, what have you done today? Whether it was the yard work and gardening that he loved, work on the computer, on the internet, which was in its early stages at that point, or attending to his investments. Mort would often share insights gleaned from his Wall Street Journal with me. He enjoyed it all. I used to say to him, when I grow up, I want to be Mort Kanovsky. That always brought out the broad smile that came so easily to him. He was a wonderful mentor and a good friend. I miss him already. Mort and Charla were instrumental in helping me start Habonim. The kickoff for the group was Shabbat dinner that I put together in the old building. After dinner, I made the case for this group coming to fruition, and I asked for volunteers. Mort and Charla were among the first to step up, along with Len and Judy Simkin. Together, we organized a Shabbaton retreat and went away to a camp for a weekend where we had a Ramah-style Shabbat together. We had our meals together, we had services together, and we had study sessions too. It was a wonderful weekend that had a lasting impact. Mort and Charla were a very important part of it all. I mentioned the computer, and Mort was very into computer technology and its uses as it pertained to our shul. He chaired one of our earliest technology committees and was instrumental in helping us get a website when other synagogues had yet to have their own. As a volunteer, he worked daily to make sure that it was current and relevant. Every week, I would write out my sermons and send them to Mort, and he would post them on the Bethel website. Even when Mort and Charla were in Sanibel Island, Florida, he continued to monitor the website. Mort loved, with a capital spelling, Mort loved Bethel. In more recent years, Mort and Charla and Helene and I had the opportunity to travel the world together, along with other members of Bethel on the trips Helene and I led. Together, we went to Stockholm, Copenhagen, and Berlin, Morocco, and Israel as well. We had some wonderful adventures together. He expressed his deep admiration for the marriage and life you built together, how it is not only an expression of the deepest love and commitment, but how it is a model to others to strive to emulate in their own way. And he reflects on what we all want to tell you, which is how much we respect and are inspired by your continued love and patience, even at the hardest and most frightening times, as Mort's health declined. Charla, he says, and we agree, has a heart of gold. And finally, he says what we're also thinking, which is that the connection of Mort's passing and Bella's upcoming bat mitzvah is a difficult overlapping of sad loss and anticipated wonderful celebration. And he beautifully concludes, as devoted as Mort was to his children and grandchildren, I know that Mort's presence will fill their hearts this coming Shabbat, and that his spirit will live on forever in all of them. Charlotte, in our conversation, some of your last words of reflection stuck with me and will continue to, as something of the essence of Mort's legacy. And those were, he was always kind, and you are always a team. I express my condolences and those of our and your Beth El family to this grieving but grateful family, to Sharon and Alan, Steve and Polly, to the grandchildren, Alexandra, Jeremy, and Bella, who will continue to make sure that their grandpa's legacy in the form of values, commitments, and a lot of love is carried down through the generations. Tenishmatot Tzura B'Tzura Chaim, may the memory of Mort Kanovsky be bound up in the bond of eternal life. May he rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. I want to note that family will be gathering at Sharon and Alan's home, which some of you may remember as Mort and Charla's home, 9 Annville Court in Cherry Hill, today following interment at Crescent. Visitation is welcome through the balance of the afternoon today, and there will be a service at 6 o'clock p.m. In the home this late afternoon, early evening as well. I want to recognize friends and leadership of Lionsgate here today, and that will continue to support you in the days to come. I want to recognize our clergy partner, Cantor Janice Schachter, for being here as well as others in the Lionsgate leadership. And there will be Wednesday visitation at Lionsgate in their Commons Hall, beginning at 2:15 p.m. So today, Annville Court, following interment with a service at 6, and tomorrow at Lionsgate beginning at 2:15 p.m. This time, we call on our Chazan to chant the Amalei memorial prayer, invoking Mort's Hebrew name, his status as a Kohen, as well as those of his parents. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit.
El male rachamim, shochen b'meromim, hametzeh menucha nechona tachat kanefei hashechina, b'malot kedoshim u'tehorim, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת מרדכי ראובן בן שלמה הכהן ברחל רזל, שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו. אנא בר הרחמים, הסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור חיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום המשכבו, ונאמר אמן. זיכרונו לברכה.
El Malei Rachamim, exalting compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Mort Kanovsky, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. You may be seated.
We can rise once more, please.